Okay, thank you all for being here. The format is very simple and straightforward. We are going to have Robert Stone speak for 10 minutes, present his views on the plant. Marilyn will speak for 10 minutes, and then each of them will have a chance to ask questions of the other, again, each for 10 minutes. After which, we will take those little cards that you took and answer some of your questions as well. So I think that is about it. And and by the way, Robert asked me if I'm very strict about time limits, and yes, I am. So in the middle of a sentence, I will. Well, I'll let him finish the sentence.
I'll keep this time. I'll raise my hand if it's getting close to.
Okay. Cards. So, some people here need cards. Okay, we're going to start. And Robert, go.
All right. This may come as a surprise to some of you, but I've been anti-nuclear most of my life. I began my career by making a documentary that some of the old-timers in this room might know, a film called Radio Bikini, about the Bikini Island atomic bomb test. It got nominated for an Oscar. It launched my career. And I, like most of my generation, I was a child of the Cold War. I conflated nuclear weapons with nuclear power. I thought it was a righteous and moral cause, I still do, to abolish nuclear weapons. And that just carried over to my views on nuclear energy. I've never been an activist, I'm a filmmaker, but if you stopped me on the street, I would say, yeah, sure, nuclear power, who needs it? Shut it down, it's dangerous. I probably believe many of the things that Marilyn's going to talk about today. In recent years, I've become more and more concerned about climate change and with the growing awareness that just about everything that we've been doing for the past 25 or 30 years since we really became aware of this problem has failed. I mean, we are simply not making the progress that we need to make in order to solve this problem. Now, this is a representation of the world's energy use, where we get our energy. This is everything: transportation, electricity, heating, everything. And as you can see, you know, there's a fairly good amount of clean energy, and then there's a massive amount of fossil fuels. And it's incumbent upon everybody who cares about this issue to expand the wedge of clean energy and to reduce the amount of fossil fuels. That's the primary imperative for anybody who cares about climate change. And it's immaterial to me what kind of clean energy it is, whether it's Indian Point nuclear, spinach, carrots. I really don't care. I just want there to be more clean energy and less fossil fuels. And the best science that we have today is suggesting that we need to completely eliminate fossil fuels by 2050 or thereabouts, if we're going to avert a climate catastrophe, of which New York is an epicenter, as we discovered in Hurricane Sandy. So what caused me and many others to change our minds is that you look here at where are we getting our clean energy? What actually makes up that clean energy wedge? And you see the vast majority of it is either nuclear or hydro, with small contributions, growing contributions from wind and solar, but very, very minor. Mostly wind and hydro and nuclear. And when you hear the term renewable energy, large percentages of energy coming from renewable energy, you can see the vast majority of renewable energy is actually hydroelectric power. So we've been making a lot of progress over the last few decades, as you can see. This is the amount of zero carbon electricity that's been put in absolute terms. It's growing, and as you can see in the beginning of the century, we started to ramp up wind, solar's coming on, and it's grown fairly quickly, but still we're looking at nuclear and hydro as the majority sources. Now, this slide here is the shocker for me. I found out about this after I made my film, and it is truly troubling. Since around 1990, the percentage of clean energy, the percentage of clean electricity worldwide is actually declining. So we are not even making any progress in solving climate change. In fact, it's going backwards. We're using more fossil fuels and less clean energy with every passing year, with a slight uptick in 2013, you see. But the overall trend is everything's going the wrong way. And this has caused me and a number of other environmentalists and people who formerly opposed nuclear energy to take a second look at it and reconsider our former opposition. Now, let's look at New York, because this is what we're talking about. New York's got an incredibly good and proud record to stand on when it comes to clean energy. We have the lowest CO2 emissions per capita of any state in the union, which is pretty great. And this is where we're getting most of our energy. You can see 40% of it's gas, still a lot, but it's gas. We hardly use any coal, 3% coal, 31% nuclear, and 19% hydro. We're getting some wind, we're getting some solar, and that's growing, that's good. But it's still we're using an awful lot of gas. Now, again, this is our clean energy mix. Where are we getting our clean energy? And 58% of New York's clean energy is coming from nuclear. You shut down a nuclear plant, we have less clean energy. It's as simple as that. Now, we've got, I think, 6 reactors running in New York State, 2 of which are in Indian Point, and you can imagine we're going to take a big hit in New York State's clean energy portfolio if we shut down those 2 reactors. Now, I know everybody says, oh, well, if you shut down the nuclear plant, we're just going to replace it with wind and solar, right? Or we're going to replace it with hydro coming in from somewhere. But look, just use your common sense. It's a mathematical certainty. It's a mathematical certainty that every time you reduce some clean energy production, all of that wind and solar or other renewables that goes into replacing what you've just shut down is wind, solar, or hydro, or energy efficiency that's not displacing gas or coal. I don't care if we shut down Indian Point. I don't care if we never use nuclear again. I don't care. I'm not wedded to it. My position is we've got to shut down all the gas plants and all the coal plants first. Once we've proven that we can do that, then we can have a debate about whether we want Indian Point and who needs it, right? If we can do it all with wind and solar or something else. I don't care. Like I say, it's immaterial to me how we get there. I just don't want to be burning fossil fuels anymore. New York City, 93% of the clean generated electricity that's coming into New York City comes from Indian Point. It's nuclear power. We get rid of Indian Point, and New York goes from being on a pretty good trajectory to just burning gas. Just burning gas. Now, I know people in New York, we care about climate change. We care about making a difference. And this is where the rubber meets the road in our convictions. We had the biggest climate march in history in this city. Do we really want to go from clean energy, or a lot of clean energy, to just saying, I'm too fearful of this technology. It's got a lot of connotations I don't like. I'm worried about it. Let's just burn more gas. Well, that's a decision we all have to make, but that's what's going to happen. So there are trade-offs. Now, one of the most interesting things for me about nuclear, when I started looking into it, is just about everything I thought about nuclear energy turned out to be false. And everything that passes for conventional wisdom turns out to be not true, but even more so, the most amazing thing is a lot of it turns out the opposite is true. So I know a lot of people think, well, nuclear is must be the most dangerous source of energy. Maybe we need it because it's clean, but it's so damn dangerous. Well, the truth is that nuclear is actually the safest form of generating electricity. It's not only, it's the safest. The number of people who died from nuclear power this year in the world, 0. Last year, 0. The year before, 0. The number of people who've died from nuclear power is 0, okay? And that's according to the World Health Organization. So you can dispute me, but I'm getting numbers from the World Health Organization. The number of people, the latest estimates of the number of people who die from fossil fuel pollution is 5.5 million people a year, okay? And nuclear power is actually per terawatt, per unit of energy produced, which is the important number, is even safer than solar power. I know that's shocking to people, but it's actually true, and there's peer-reviewed studies about this. Now, I understand from the introduction that Marilyn is particularly concerned about nuclear waste, and believe me, that was a total deal breaker for me. The idea of passing on a toxic legacy to future generations was horrifying, and I'd always been told about mountains of nuclear waste, and it was really terrifying. In the course of making my film, I got a chance to visit the site in France where they store all of their nuclear, or high-level nuclear waste, the 25,000-year stuff that we're all scared of. and if they keep it in this one room where it's about the size of a basketball court. It's stored in these tubes. They're about 1 meter wide, 10 meters deep, and vitrified glass, and they're surrounded by stainless steel. And now, granted, France recycles their waste, so it's reduced somewhat. But France powers 80% of their electric grid with nuclear power. Pretty much their electric grid is pretty much carbon free. I could not get my hand around like how little there was. So I asked this guy standing here, how many of these tubes is what's left from powering the city of Paris for 30 years? He said 4 tubes. What?
We're at 10 minutes, so
Okay.
1 more minute.
We're at 10 minutes already?
We are.
Oh my God.
Something-
Okay.
Well, you'll get that.
Anyway, so if we shut down Indian Point, it's going to be the equivalent of adding 1.7 million cars to the road. And I think I just come back to this. It's like the rubber meets the road. Are we going to be part of the problem, using more fossil fuels, running New York City with gas, or are we going to be part of the solution? And these are the kind of the decisions, these hard decisions, where it really puts your convictions on the line. Are we going to tolerate Indian Point and learn about it and go with it until we can replace it with renewables, everything, stop burning gas? Or are we just going to say, I'm too fearful of this technology, I'm going to let my antiquated anxieties from the Cold War cloud my views, and let's just burn gas? Well, go tell your children that. Frankly, it's deeply personal to me, and I think this graph right here says it all. So
Okay,
thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Slides. I really appreciate that. Well, it's nice to see that we do agree on the fact that fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. And we certainly need to move towards very clean energy by 2050. Some people say 2030. We need to do that. Nuclear is not part of that mix. And we can talk about nuclear more broadly, or we can look more specifically at Indian Point, which is what I would like to do tonight. It's a poster child. Indian Point's sort of a poster child for the industry. And if you haven't seen what it looks like, there's a picture of it. There are the domes on the Hudson. The spent fuel pools are in the buildings in front, and there's the discharge canal. Because every single nuclear power plant that operates, every civilian power plant, has regular discharges of radiation. This plant is allowed to discharge 1,300 curies of radiation every year. It's also leaking water, tritiated water with other radioactive isotopes into the Hudson. It sets about 69 feet up above the river, and the water is making it down to the tritiated water. The radioactive isotopes are making its way down to the river through the shattered rock on that cliff that you see where the plant is. For those of you who have never seen the inside of a nuclear power plant, it looks like this. Looks like something from the 50s, and indeed it is. It is technology from the 50s when everything was centralized and the current thinking of the day was bigger is better. That technology has not changed very much at all. You can hear a lot about Generation 4 and all the new things that are coming and fast breeder reactors and how the waste will be used up as fuel, and it's always 20 years down the road. That's the way it's been since nuclear power came on board. No one really wanted to look at the waste issue. Indian Point has every single fuel rod that has ever been used, just like reactors all over the country, right there on site. They're housed in those buildings that you see, that you saw. They are commercial buildings, they are not hardened. And there is more radiation, radioactivity, than there was in all of Fukushima, because we have 40 years of storage there. We have no policy for it. They are not vitrified. They do need to be moved to dry cast storage, which the company does when they have to take out a couple fuel rods to when they refuel. Nuclear power has a dark side that you didn't hear very much about in Mr. Stone's presentation, and that's the fact that if you're going to compare deaths and other problems with nuclear power with the workers, you don't look at the plant. What you do look at is you look at uranium mining. And uranium mining, like coal, because that's comparing apples to apples, is very deadly for any community. The communities that live next to them suffer greatly, and so do the workers. The Bureau of Labor, Department of Labor, is spending more than $12 billion, $12 billion, and that's for 1,500 claims, benefits and also death claims for nuclear workers. The Navajo have a saying, you may meet old coal miners, but you will never meet old uranium miners. And there's a reason for that. Climate change is one of the, maybe the biggest issues that are facing us right now. Nuclear has no part in that, and I'll tell you why. If you want to build a nuclear plant, it takes $17 billion. They're building one in Vogel right now. They started out saying it's going to be $9 billion. This is in Georgia. It went up and up and up. That plant is now at $26 billion. How many of these plants do you need? Who's going to pay for it? And what are you going to do with the waste? And by the way, while we're talking about that, I will mention that France no longer uses 80% of nuclear energy for their grid. They have decided, and I think rightly so, to lower that to 50%, and they now buy wind energy from Germany on the days that they need more electricity. For even France is moving to get cleaner and greener. And the plants there are also government operated. I don't think that's something we want to see here in this country. We have merchant plants, we have a very strong grid. How big an area could an accident be? This is the footprint of the Fukushima radioactive release. I put it over our area here just so you could get an idea of the scale of the problem. If something happened at Indian Point, it would not look like this. I absolutely understood. But look at the amount of distance and ground it covers. We are talking about 20 million people whose lives could potentially be at risk, a river that could be contaminated, a city, New York City, a college that could be contaminated. So it's not a matter of being hysterical, it's a perception of risk. That's what we're looking at. You can see the footprint, you know that these plants were designed for 40 years. Indian Point 3 has had 7 unplanned shutdowns this year, 7. Even one is not a good thing at a nuclear plant. They don't know it's working and then suddenly it's not. Luckily, these were not severe accidents. The plant shut down, the plant started back up. But 7 unplanned accidents at a nuclear reactor tells you that just like a car, you can drive it for so long. You might have a favorite car, you might want to keep it forever. Things start going wrong with it. You are, in nuclear technology, you start managing aging equipment. But then when do you stop doing that? When does it become unsafe to drive? When does the transmission give you problems? When do the brakes not work right? Well, a nuclear plant is like that on steroids when it gets to be 40 years old. Indian Point 2 is closed for refueling right now, and it will have to stay down longer because they found degraded bolts in the liners that hold, it's a special liner that is attached to the reactor inside. Those bolts were degraded after 40 years of exposure to radioactivity. They were not even part of the Managing Aging Equipment program. They were discovered unexpectedly. Lots of things happen like that with Indian Point, and surprises at a nuclear power plant are not something you want. There are many safeguards. There are redundant systems. And I'm very glad for the workers that are there who do work to keep us safe. I appreciate them. But I think let me give you a quote from Gil Scott-Heron. He's one of my favorite jazz singers. If perfection is what it takes, you can't use people, don't need people. We know people make mistakes. And every time there has been a nuclear accident, it has been something awry technically and then a human error. So coming back to that human error and looking at the risk. I don't have to be hysterical. I don't have to take umbrage at a technology that's so old. I don't have to be afraid of it. I see it, I know it, it's there. But I do want to know the risks, and I think other people should too. The bulletin, this month's issue of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists said The United States, with 104 reactors, has about a 50% probability of experiencing a one-core melt accident within the next 15 years. The title of that article is, "How Safe is Nuclear Power? A Statistical Study Suggests Less Than Expected." So I think there are other ways, cheaper, cleaner, greener, that we can generate our electricity without that risk. It's not a matter of being afraid of it. It's a matter of a calculation, a cost-benefit calculation. And what do citizens do when, in a democracy, when you make up your mind about something? Well, you demonstrate, you sign petitions, you write letters, you talk to your local officials, and that has been very effective with Indian Point and with other power plants in Vermont, for example, across the nation. What you find is after you've made all of these decisions and you've gone to your local officials, you run up against the regulatory agency, and that's the NRC. This is a rather Byzantine chart. I'm certainly not going to take time to go over it, but that tells you what it takes to close Indian Point, to relicense it. 3 different mainstreams there, they go back and forth. I will just very briefly tell you that all of these agencies and people and departments are in hearings right now, and it will be in court. Department of Environmental Conservation has said that plant does tremendous damage to the river. They refuse to give them a water quality permit. And even more than that, we have the governor and we have the attorney general. Let's just have the next slide, thanks. The NRC has become the captive of the industry, so I am very proud and pleased that we have a governor and an attorney general who's willing to step forward for the health and safety of people here. In 2012, Governor Cuomo put in place, he told the PSC, the Public Service Commission, to put in place a contingency plan. So 3 years ago, the Public Service Commission started looking at what could happen if Indian Point was to be replaced. How would we do it? And they put out a request for proposals. They got a lot of proposals, a lot of them, because in our free market, we have a robust market, and there are people, corporations that are making money selling electricity. And those are the people that stepped up to put in proposals to put more power into our grid. We also have a Bureau of Coastal Management department. Indian Point has to have a letter of approval from them. They didn't get it because 3 years later, after all of these proposals had been put into effect and many of them put into the ground and operating, the Bureau of Coastal Management denied a letter of approval to Indian Point because of the damage it does to our coastal waters. It was not in keeping with the good use of coastal waters to have that plant using 2.5 billion gallons of water every day and endangering many of the native species and other things as well. Well, you can take a look. Can we have the next slide?
We're actually at time.
May I have 1 more minute to finish up?
1 more minute.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What they found was that with all of the new things that they put in place, we have an ample supply of electricity. And you don't need new generation to replace Indian Point. Indian Point has already been replaced. Let's just go to the next slide, people, if you don't mind.
I don't know how.
Okay, Leslie, could you just do the next slide, please? That's the really important one. No, there's one more and then we'll finish. People do need to see the replacement power that's already in place. It's already in place, it's there. Indian Point's down right now, the grid's not blinking or your lights are not going off. We have a total of 5,245 megawatts. It's from transmission improvements. It is from, I'd like to pull up that very last one too, if you want to go. Oh, okay, all right, we'll stop. So we have from transmission improvements, generation, conservation, efficiency, all of these things count. So it's not likely at all that our carbon will go up, neither will our electricity bills. Where's the electricity from Indian Point going? Well, a lot of it goes to Boston. Their rates are supposedly going up, but ours probably won't. And what we need to do for our children and for future generations is to have clean and green electricity, that which is just a fleeting byproduct of what you get from nuclear power plants.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so now we are going to have our debaters speak to each other.
Okay.
And I guess since Robert went first, you were first questioning, and then we want you to be writing questions from the audience, because you're the people who are getting engaged here.
Good, thank
Okay.
you. Well, it would take, how many nuclear reactors would it take to make a dent, do you think, Robert? And who's going to pay for them?
How many nuclear reactors?
Would it take to make a dent in climate change? And how do you think, how would they be paid for?
It's immaterial to me how we do it. The question is, what we're talking about now is taking an existing plant. We're not talking about putting any new money, building a big expensive plant. We've got an existing plant that you want to take offline. Actually, 2 reactors that you want to take offline. So it's going to be replaced by gas. That's okay. If that's, I'm just saying, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I don't think we should do that. But I think a lot of people think that there's no consequence. It's like, well, I don't like Lindsey Point, I'm a little scared of it, let's shut it down, and life goes on. Well, life will go on, the lights will go on, because they're going to build a gas plant. Probably, excuse me,
Sure.
Probably they'll build a gas plant right at Lindsey Point, because that's where electricity transmission lines are. But they probably won't be able to build a big enough one, so that there's a very good likelihood we're going to have to start up some of the coal plants in New York.
I think,
Replace that. I mean, that's, you know, we could make that choice, but just be aware that's a choice you make.
I don't believe that's true. I think you have some old information. If you look behind you at the stats on the slide from the Bureau of Coastal Management, that's from December 30th, 2015, just last year. You'll see that we've already replaced Indian Point with transmission upgrades. We've already replaced it with a lot of things besides generation. We don't need to build any more new gas plants to replace Indian Point.
What do you mean? How can you, if you're generating electricity out of the plant, and you turn it off, where does the electricity suddenly come from?
Well, you'd make better use of the electricity that you have.
Okay.
You bring it in from other sources.
Okay.
You use less of it.
And all of those efforts are efforts that are not being used to shut down gas plants.
Well, I think you're mixing apples and oranges again. And I'm a pragmatist. I really think that, and my risk perception is probably a great deal higher than yours, because I have talked to people from Fukushima, I have talked to people from the Chernobyl area, I have talked to people from the mining communities out west, and all 3 of those communities have one thing in common. What they all say is that if more plants are built, even if Indian Point continues, you're using uranium. The people out west say you can help us close it by using less uranium, and we can close the mines down that do so much damage. The people in Fukushima say, don't let this happen. You have more people around Indian Point than we had in Fukushima. And the people in Chernobyl show their children that have thyroid cancer and many other terrible diseases. It's just really, really sad.
Well, excuse me, I've actually been to both Chernobyl and Fukushima. Been to Chernobyl twice. I showed my film to the refugees from Chernobyl, and they told me that my film was the most truthful thing they'd ever seen on the subject.
Pandora's Promise?
Right, that's right.
Well, I guess we would have to compare refugees.
You know what they also told me? There's an entire city that's been built for them to live in, way up on the border with Belarus. They told me no documentary filmmaker has ever come and talked to them. And they are so angry at how they've been depicted around the world. And we are not all dying of cancer. Our kids are not. They stand by the World Health Organization report on Chernobyl, which said that less than 60 people have died there.
Well, that's a very interesting report.
Well, the people of Chernobyl stand by it. I was there on the anniversary of Chernobyl, and there was a very moving ceremony at the very hour that Chernobyl blew. And they had got a memorial in the middle of the town with photographs of all the people who died. They know these people. I'm sorry, if you're trying to tell me that Chernobyl, and Chernobyl's kind of a one-off crazy Soviet reactor, if you're trying to tell me that because Chernobyl happened, that we should shut down Indian Point. I mean, at Fukushima, how many people died at Fukushima of radiation?
How many will die over the next few years?
What's your information on that?
The information about who has died is mixed. You have a contaminated area. an exclusion zone that people can't go back. You have people who are organic farmers who have been here and visited in the Hudson Valley. They can't grow things there now. You have food that is contaminated, and you have people scared to death about what they feed, to their children. In fact, in Pandora's Promise, I think you show one of the community Geiger counters. And I noticed in that film too, you were holding the Geiger counter, or the counter, and radiation counter up quite high and saying, well, look, it seems pretty good. But then radiation's not in the air, it's in everything that it has touched, in the soil, and in everything that the people are eating that's taken up through the different plants. We can talk statistics, but I want to go back to risk perception, because that's what it comes down to. If, for example, you're a soldier or a police officer and you get shot at, and you don't get hurt, you've had a very good day. You go home, you live to tell the tale, maybe you talk about it, maybe you not, you go back. If you're a civilian and you go out and you get shot at, and you do not get a bullet and you're not hurt, you've had a very bad day. It's the same thing, it's the same fact. It's not different, it's the same. And yet, the risk perception of what you want to put up with, of what you can tolerate, is totally different. And that's the way it is with the nuclear industry. They're willing to tolerate a much higher risk, a much higher risk.
Why would they do that? I mean, think about it. Just think about it for a second. When Fukushima happened, and the entire nuclear industry is just going under. Nuclear plants are being shut down all over the world. If anybody has an interest in making sure that that never happens, it's the nuclear industry, because if one little accident and just all hell breaks loose, they're done, they're bankrupt.
That's true.
One small thing that happens at a nuclear plant is front page news around the world. That's true. I'm not saying Fukushima was a huge accident. It's a huge accident. Triple meltdown, breach of containment, and yet not a single person, according to the World Health Organization, and the best studies we have, not a single person has died or ever will die or will have their life shortened as a consequence of Fukushima. I know that's surprising to people.
It's not surprising at all. It's not surprising. It's not the best science we have, and neither is it surprising when you look at the World Health Organization and how those figures were compiled. It was really before the collapse, the final collapse of the Soviet Union, and everybody that.
How about Fukushima?
Well, I'm talking about the World Health. I'm talking about the World Health Society, or the World Health Organization, and how they compiled their stats. The stats on Fukushima are still coming in, but they took out everything. And if somebody didn't die immediately, they took that group out, they took this group out, they took that group out. And what I would say about that study, figures may not lie, but liars figure. And that it's not a conspiracy. It's a group of politicians who got together and tried to make themselves look good, and tried very hard to make sure that they could cover up for their industries and they could cover up for themselves.
So you're saying the World Health Organization is an organization of politicians trying to cover up for...
I'm saying that the World Health Organization did not do an accurate study.
All right, and who would do a more accurate study?
There are, I'll have to give you, I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Sorry, Marilyn, this is precisely the thing that this is precisely the thing that climate deniers say about climate change. It's almost word for word.
I don't understand you.
They say that the United Nations, the IPCC, says climate change is happening, it's a clear and present danger, and they produce all kinds of statistics, and people who are against climate, who don't believe it, say, oh, it's a corrupt organization, it's all politics, they're doing it for the money, and I have a study over here that's done by so-and-so that said the whole thing is a hoax, and it's just a natural process, and they're just cherry-picking science. And at a certain point, you have to go with the best peer-reviewed science that's widely accepted among all scientists.
You do. You do. I agree with that.
Right? And for instance, James Hansen, the world's leading climate scientist who brought climate science to the attention of the world 25 years ago, is strongly advocating that we maintain Indian Point, and is strongly advocating for nuclear power because he knows, as most energy experts know, that there is absolutely no way to solve climate change without nuclear energy. That's not my fault. That's just a fact. We have very few tools.
There's a very interesting discussion that you can still find online. When James Hansen was working on his book on nuclear power, he had a debate back and forth with Amory Lovins, who makes a lot of money helping people save electricity, and calls nuclear power a walking corpse held up by subsidies from the different governments, which I think I agree with. And Amory is certainly not hysterical or afraid of nuclear power. He's looking at the economics. So James Hansen is, you can do any number of studies, and I would like to take this debate away from the studies that, from fact on fact and study versus study, because that gets you nowhere. I remember Andy Spano saying, when he was the chief executive of Westchester County, I remember him saying, you've got experts on one side, you've got experts on the other side, one says one thing, one says the other. We have to look at the risk to people involved. I am in charge, and he was then, of Westchester. What do I do for the health and safety of people? And it's not keeping Indian Point open. And in fact, the markets are actually closing nuclear power plants because they can't compete with the cheap wind that's coming in. So if you look at our grid.
They can't compete with the cheap gas.
No.
They can't.
No.
We're having a debate.
Excuse me. Hey, excuse me, ma'am. I'm the moderator. You are not. Because they're having a conversation, and I will judge whether it is out of control. All right?
Okay, that's fine. It's fine. Okay.
Are you okay with the back and forth?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I was just about to agree with you. I agree. Nuclear power plants are being shut down. They're being priced out, but it's because of cheap gas. Wind is being shut out because of cheap gas. Solar is being shut out because of cheap gas. They're maintained by subsidies. And that is true. I don't think it's a good thing. As I said, we need to have as much clean energy as we can. And right now, there are three technologies.
Go ahead.
Just quickly.
List them.
There are three technologies that we can to solve climate change. One is carbon capture. We can make clean coal, maybe.
Well,
I'm just
that's
saying.
an oxymoron.
It is. I totally agree with you. It
That's
is.
an
We don't have
oxymoron.
the technology to do it, but that is one way to do it. Is if we could suck out all the CO2 and somehow pump it underground, that could work, right?
No.
Or to make renewables work, we need massive amounts of storage, energy storage, so we could power New York City at night in a polar vortex on battery power. That technology is beginning, but we don't really have it. The one technology we have to do this right now is nuclear power. Maybe 30, 40 years from now we'll have something else. And that's
We
fine.
also, may I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. We have offshore wind. We have a lot of other things. We don't need a polar vortex. We don't need Indian Point to keep New York City operating at night. We have a way to move our electricity around. We have a very strong and robust grid. We don't have to produce the power right here. A lot of people think that they're just going to run it. It's almost like you have to run into Indian Point with a extension cord and plug it in so you can get your power. Your power comes from all over. We have transmission lines that carry it safely and efficiently. Ever since the 2003 blackout, that has gotten better and better and better. We're using less, and we can move it around faster, and we don't have to generate it.
So
it still comes in.
Let me just ask. One of the objections to renewables like solar and wind that I have heard a great deal from experts is that, in fact, the places where the wind blows most steadily and most powerfully is actually quite far from the transmission grid.
Correct.
So in order to make that work for us in a reliable way, we'd have to build a lot of new grid infrastructure. Is that?
That's one. Well, if we don't build it, we have to improve what we have. Yes.
No, but it's that literally the wires are not.
And
there.
I'm not talking about bringing wind from the Great Plains.
Okay.
I'm talking about offshore wind. I'm talking about upstate New York wind. Now, there are problems with the grid. There are congestion points. Many of those have already been eliminated, and they're already working on making that upstate wind more available to downstate so that we can use it here. But we still need solar on our rooftops for distributed generation. We still need to be able to conserve and use things like demand response. When a big company can get paid a small sum to cut down their usage at peak, for example, maybe cut the lights down, take the air conditioner down a few degrees, so instead of having that very, very sharp high peak that might lead you into some kind of rolling blackout, you keep a steady level usage going. Goes up, but it's still steady. It's manageable. They are doing this in Germany. The Energiewende program has made a lot of sense. They're still having problems. They still have some of the same problems that we do, but not to the degree. And they have goals that they've set out in front of them. And that's what we need to do here. We need the clean and green energy that's cheap and reliable and affordable, and that is not nuclear power.
Well, Germany is an interesting example.
Yes, it is.
Germany, after Fukushima, they got spooked about nuclear power.
No, they didn't.
And they didn't get spooked?
No, that program started, the Energiewende program started.
No, I'm talking about the nuclear shutdown.
No, that was on plan. Now, Angela Merkel had wanted to delay it for a couple of years. She's a nuclear physicist. She said, well, I see the plants are working. They tell me they can't melt down. Fukushima happened, and she said, I was wrong. We're going to go back to our original schedule,
Okay.
which they then completed, and they're still working on.
I'm not going to argue with that. But
2022, all closed.
right, that's right. And they've been shutting down their nuclear plants, and they've done more with wind and solar than any other country in the world. They can afford it. They put
Well,
billions.
no, I think the Netherlands, I think there are other countries. Anyway, go
Actually,
ahead.
China's done the most on that, but Germany has done an incredible job, and
Yes,
they
they
should get
have.
applauded for it because they actually have a national energy policy to go green. That's great. But
Correct.
The fact is, they've been building coal plants and burning the dirtiest coal, lignite coal, the dirtiest coal on the planet, brown coal.
In the Cologne region, they have lignite, and one of the problems they have are the same problems that we have here: jobs. No politician in that area wants to close down the plants. They want to keep them open as long as they can, because if you're a politician and you lose jobs, you lose your office. It is no different, I think, with Governor Cuomo trying to keep Fitzpatrick open, an upstate reactor, propping it up with all kinds of subsidies, because the upstate economy needs it. I'm going to take a pretty tough line here. I'm going to say that the nuclear power plants that we have are not job factories. They're supposed to be producing electricity. And we need a just and even transition for the people who are working there. We need to take care of those people. They need to stay and work there for decommissioning. We need to do that. But we do not need to keep nuclear plants open in order to provide jobs for people.
So, Robert, the point about how expensive nuclear plants are, I understand if that climate change is a very, very serious problem, and it's going to cost us enormous amounts of money if we don't limit our emissions. But it's certainly true that nuclear plants are extraordinarily expensive. Extraordinarily expensive to build, and they do take a long time to build. I mean, do you feel that we should have more nuclear plants, or are you just saying we should keep the ones we have going a little longer?
Well, clearly, if you've got a plant that you've already invested money in, it's there, it's running, it's actually making money, it seems to make sense to keep it. As for the future of nuclear power, as I said, I don't care whether it's nuclear or it's algae, or it's not, the point of the matter is we need to expand the amount of clean energy we have very, very rapidly to provide energy to a growing and hungry world. Now, nuclear power plants right now are very expensive to build. In the United States and a couple of other countries, overall, in China they're doing it quite affordably, but they're doing lots of them. The economies of scale, in France, you know, they built 50 nuclear plants just in a decade, pretty much. So they standardize everything. They turn these things out in factories, and that's the way you do it. In the United States, we build one or two at a time, and it gets very expensive. So, yeah.
So here's a question for you on something you said. You talked about 7 shutdowns or 7 alarms, and you characterized them. Sorry?
Unplanned shutdown.
Right. Were you calling those? And you called those accidents. Is that appropriate? Were those? Do they not shut down if some alarm goes off and they have to check something out?
something happened that was not right.
Right. But
And the
that-
plant shut down. There was no release of radioactivity, according to, if that's your
well,
question.
that's what the word accident
Yeah.
suggests to me.
No.
So if,
No, I'm not saying that radioactivity was released. I didn't say anything about that. But I would like to go back to France for just a minute. And the way France rolled out their reactors. Areva is the company that no longer is because it's bankrupt, was the company that did that. They did that with the French government. You could never see all the stats on the French nuclear plants because it was the government and it was a secret. If you were in France and you were doing what I'm doing right now, not too many years ago, you could get arrested because that information was private. And it was not there. It's a very different system there. So it's very hard. Again, you're comparing apples and oranges, and Areva went bankrupt because of what they did. They went bankrupt because of the new the new power plants, the new reactors that they tried to build. They never worked. The Generation 4 that they're in court now with Finland because that reactor could not be put together. They're having all those kinds of problems in Georgia with Vogtle. Can I tell you a story about that reactor?
yes.
Okay, it's a quick reactor, a quick story. A quick story. It's not a quick reactor. They had to lay down a concrete pad. It had lots of rebar in it, horizontal rebar. It had lots of other ductwork and stuff like that going through it as well. Well, it's prefab because that's supposed to cut down the cost. And they had to put another slab on top of it so they could put in some vertical rebar to hold the two pieces together. Rebar is that really strong metal stuff that comes in all kinds of different grades, makes your concrete stronger and makes it last. Well, the engineers marked where the holes for the vertical rebar were supposed to go. They came to put the rebar in, and guess what? It did not line up. Oops. Little allowance here, a little allowance there, prefab over here, prefab over there. And the company that was putting in the concrete said, oh, we know what to do. We'll just make more holes for the vertical rebar to go in. Well, when they did that, they not only impinged and impeached the construction, the integrity of that first layer, they also did other damage, and they had to stop all the building in the plant. They had to wait, and you know what they're waiting for? An exemption from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to see if that pad is going to take the stress that it needs to have for another 40 years with the reactor. That's what's happening, and the cost goes up and up and up. This is not a way to provide our clean energy for our future. That's the way the nuclear power plants are constructed. You can watch it at Vogtle and see. Not what we need. Cheaper, better, more reliable, and more efficient ways to go.
Okay, so let me start taking some questions here from the audience.
Great.
You mentioned the storage of these spent fuel rods on site at this
I did.
plant and all the others. And Robert, you're aware of that problem here in the U.S. Whether or not we close Indian Point, what are we going to do with that fuel? Is there anything that's legitimate and reasonable for us to do with that?
No, there is not. There will be a meeting in Boston next month, and the Blue Ribbon Commission, the panel on spent nuclear fuel that President Obama convened, is going to be asking, gee, hello out there, is there a community that would like to volunteer to take it? So far, nobody has stepped up.
Well, first of all, you can go down, you can look at any energy source and go down and make there's a list of all the things you don't like about it, and you can certainly do that with nuclear. You can with almost any energy source, you can find problems with it. Wind turbines, I wouldn't want wind turbines all over the Catskills, which is near where I live. Hydroelectric power, there was a hydroelectric dam that collapsed in China in 1975. 171,000 people were killed, and 11 million people were displaced, lost their homes. Well, we haven't shut down, we haven't knocked down every hydroelectric plant in the world, but I would actually like to see that happen and let the rivers run free, but not in the middle of a climate crisis, okay? Solar panels have a lot of toxic elements that go into them that need to be recycled. They don't last very long. Wind turbines have all kinds of problems as well in terms of land area, birds, anything has a problem. But the problem is we've got a growing energy-hungry world that needs a lot of power. And in terms of waste, nuclear because of E equals mc squared, uses a tiny amount of material to produce a massive amount of energy with a tiny amount of waste that is contained. And one of the things that I discovered in the course of making my film, which was very exciting, was that we actually, this is not pie in the sky 20 years from now, but we already know, we've known for 20 years, how to reprocess the spent fuel and use it as fuel for the next generation of nuclear plants, because 95% of the energy is still in the nuclear waste. And right now, if you took all of the nuclear waste in this country that we've had over all of the years that we've been building it up, if we use it in fourth generation reactors, which will be coming online in the 2030s, 2040s, we could power everything in the United States, everything, including the transportation sector, everything, for 1,000 years without ever mining a gram of uranium ever again. And you'd get rid of all the plutonium, get rid of all the uranium. And so as a long-term thing, it's not something we really need to worry about. The contrast that with the pollution, the waste from fossil fuels, which is simply dumped into the atmosphere, a toxic heavy metal, mercury, is in every fish in the ocean. Every fish in the ocean. It doesn't have a half-life of 25,000 years. It has a half-life of forever, okay? As the ocean is becoming acidified, it's killing off the species.
Yes, it is.
The Antarctic ice sheet is collapsing because of burning fossil fuels. I could go on and on about the very real problems that are being caused by the waste from how we're currently producing energy. You're talking about hypothetical problems that might happen with a small amount of waste if, what, I don't know, nobody's ever been harmed by nuclear waste.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. Plutonium is one of the deadliest substances on the face of the planet. You can take a spent fuel rod that's about 12 foot long and maybe 4 foot at the bottom of it is plutonium. You can do all kinds of very intensive, dirty, radioactive, difficult things with it, and you can retrieve that, that plutonium. You get to use it once. We have no reactors in this country that use that kind of fuel. It's MOX, mixed oxide fuel. No reactor in this country can burn that kind of fuel. And when you talk about Generation 4 down the road, 20 years down the road, there's not one reactor that has that kind of fast breeder reactor that has any kind of thing in front of the NRC. It hasn't been looked at, it hasn't been regulated, it hasn't been tested. It's on the drawing board. It's somebody's idea. And we stopped doing fast breeder reactors, and we stopped doing that for a very good reason, because of the way they breed and produce plutonium and the proliferation problem. It really blurs the line between civilian and military, and the world is awash in plutonium. We don't need to be making any more in our civilian reactors. We don't need to be waiting for pie in the sky, which is what those Generation 4 reactors are, in order to burn it up. Because I don't think it's ever going to happen. People have been talking about that since the beginning of nuclear power. What we need to do is stop producing it. Pete Seeger used to talk about that a lot. If you can't take it apart, if you can't compost it, if you can't recycle it, then you shouldn't be making it. If you can't handle your waste, then you need to stop making that particular item in that particular way. And we cannot handle nuclear waste. It's not hypothetical. It's a bomb waiting to go off.
That would apply to solar panels as well.
I'm sorry?
That would apply to solar panels as well, what you just said. Because of the toxic elements that go into making.
And how, if you get a bunch of solar panels together, are you going to have an exothermic reaction? Are you going to endanger 20 million people?
He's right. It does violate Pete Seeger's principle, even if they're different levels. Let me ask a question here from the audience that actually might get you agreeing. I mean, you already agree on climate change.
Yeah,
this is obvious.
We do. We already agree that fossil fuels need to stay in the ground, just like uranium.
Well, I don't think you all agree.
We don't agree on that, but we do agree on fossil change.
So Amory Lovins, you invoked Amory Lovins.
Yes, I did.
And one of the things that he talks a lot about, has always talked a lot about, is how enormous the gains we could make in our, or the reductions we could make in our use of fossil fuels and other kinds of fuel through efficiency improvements. I mean, this is.
That's what he does.
That's right. So he talks about efficiency as the great way to solve this problem. I presume you would both agree, but tell me if you don't, that if we could stop using fossil fuels or largely cut back on them through the kinds of efficiency improvements that Amory Lovins talks about, and cut back on nuclear as well, that would be the ideal solution. Is that?
I think we have to, as pragmatically, yes, I think that's what we have to do.
Well, it's easy for us sitting here in New York to talk about reducing our amount of energy, but there's billions of people in the world who have absolutely no electricity at all. In India alone, 300 million people, the entire population of the United States, has no electricity at all. So tell them to start being more efficient in their use of electricity. And that's where the growth is. It's not in the United States. The growth in energy is in the developing world. So, and the other thing is, but to say about efficiency, is that we've been becoming, the whole history of the Industrial Revolution is us becoming more and more efficient at the use of energy. So, but in the course of that, we've become wealthier because we've used energy more efficiently, and therefore we end up using more of it in the aggregate. So, I mean, who could be against it being more efficient? I mean, nobody wants to waste energy, but we're not going to use efficiency to get to zero. We're not, I mean, and Amory Lovins actually predicted that through energy efficiency we could get rid of all nuclear plants and all coal plants 30, 40 years ago. But the fact is, Marilyn, I mean, how do you, I know you care about climate change, I know this is an issue you hear about. How in the world are we going to expand the clean energy wedge when you're advocating taking 2 gigawatts of clean energy offline and more? Well, it's clean, somebody said it's not clean. It's not producing CO2, it's not contributing to climate change. What do we do?
One of the things that we have been going back and forth, I think, in this conversation is that you're looking at things on a worldwide basis. I'm looking at things in my backyard. And I think everybody needs to really take care of their backyard. It's not a matter of me being responsible for bringing down a certain number of gigawatts in the world. It's a matter of me looking and seeing how I can make my community safe and green and have it operate on reliable and efficient energy. And when it comes to the third world, where all that electricity is needed, they don't need to put in grids anymore. We don't need to do that old kind of stuff. They can put in distributed generation, they can put in solar panels, and it's the politicians I have found that get in the way of a lot of that. And in China, you look at China, you're talking about all of the nuclear plants they're building in China. God help us all, because have you ever heard of tofu concrete? And the lack of regulation that those plants, of lack of regulation of everything that I have seen in China. So it's the technology itself that imperils so many people. I don't have to be hysterical about it. I have to look and I can see what's happened, and I can make decisions on my own scale, not on a worldwide scale. I don't operate on that scale, but I can do what I can here.
Well, this is something I really do agree with you, and this is why I think this discussion is so important, and this is why it's so, I think, emotional for people, is this is our backyard. This is the decision that we have to make about what our contribution is to this problem, and it is a global problem. What is New York City going to do? Are we going to go to burning gas entirely because we're afraid of what might happen at Indian Point? Or are we going to say, let's keep this plant running until such time as we can power this state entirely with other clean energy sources, wind, solar, or whatever. And then once we've done that, once we've proven what you say we can do, once we've proven that we can we've gotten rid of all the gas plants, there's no more gas plants, it's wind, solar, hydroelectric, and nuclear, then let's shut down nuclear. That's fine with me, I don't care. We can have that discussion.
Robert?
But it's the trade-off that I really object to. In the middle of a climate crisis, to start burning more gas just seems insane.
Robert, Indian Point has been replaced. If we take that plant offline, it's half offline now, you're only talking 500 megawatts because half of it is closed down. You don't leave a big hole in the electricity pool somewhere.
Where's the electricity coming from?
Look behind you.
It's
Look
coming from
behind you.
gas.
That is not gas. It's cable, it's electric, it's the St. Lawrence Seaway, it's transmission upgrades. It's all of those things. It's Indian Point is moot. The thing that's keeping Indian Point going is the money that the corporation pays to certain people, I suppose, the publicity that they do, and the fact that most people, probably many of them here in this audience, have never really looked at the issue, do not understand the risk, have no risk perception in regard to that plant, and think, gosh, 2,000 megawatts of electricity, that's terrible, what are we going to do? The market has handled it. Indian Point is replaced. Turn off Unit 3 just like you've turned off Unit 1, and the New York Independent Systems Operator will tell you nothing's going to happen to the grid. Nothing. It won't blink. You won't lose your electricity. The lights will stay on. New York Power Authority gets no electricity from Indian Point right now. They use long-term contracts, and they do not. They keep the subways running, they keep the street lights running, they keep the public schools running, they keep the public house running, they keep the airports running. None of that electricity comes from Indian Point because they found cheaper sources elsewhere.
Marilyn, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
60% of America's non-CO2 emitting electrical generation comes from nuclear power. 60%. Are you telling me that you could get rid of that 60% of America's clean generated electricity and have no impact?
I am not telling you anything about America. I am telling you, as I said before, I am looking right here. It is not the same thing. I am looking right here in my backyard. I am looking at my backyard, and I'm seeing how the New York independent service operators have taken care of our New York grid and what they have done to make it safe and strong and robust, and how power plants come online and power plants go offline. And not one of those power plants carry with it the risk that Indian Point carries. So here's a really good candidate to take offline and let other generators come in, make their money, sell their electricity, and life goes on.
So let me ask you.
Sure.
How to phrase it. You don't have a problem with other nuclear plants necessarily?
Yes, I do.
Ah,
I do.
okay, well, because I was getting the impression you just...
No. There are people who like to close Indian Point because it's the wrong plant in the wrong place, is how it's usually phrased. But no, I don't think that we need, I don't think that, as I say, the market is closing them, especially the ones that are single reactors and not double reactors. So,
that would seem to argue against your answer to Robert about the 60%. Is that 60%?
60% of America's clean energy comes from nuclear power.
I certainly would. Well, how do you want to figure clean energy? Are you figuring in the cost that we have to pay for the spent fuel, the spent fuel rods for how many generations? Are you figuring in the $12 billion that the Department of Labor pays?
Non-greenhouse gas emitting.
You know, again, we're coming back to a human factor here, aren't we? You know, I think of those people that have, the people that out west in those mining communities. There's a human factor involved in the way we produce our electricity. And frankly, my perception is that nuclear power is immoral. And I would use that ethically. We've done a lot of facts here, but I would bring in that aspect. I think it's immoral to inflict in the nuclear fuel cycle the hurt and damage that we do on people, and the hurt and damage that we do into future generations, leaving them with this mess. You learn in kindergarten, you clean up your mess.
What about the mess from the hydrofracking? What the communities in Pennsylvania?
Another one that needs to be dealt with.
Okay, so you want to shut down gas as well?
I would work towards that. We need a cleaning.
Okay. And what about mountaintop removal? All the damage we've done with coal?
Coal needs to stay in the ground.
I'm agreeing with you. So so what you're saying, we need to get rid of coal, rid of gas, and rid of nuclear, and keep the lights on with wind and solar when, I mean, let's go back to the chart
Let's go back to this chart.
more clean energy. How are we going to do this?
We're going to do it one power plant at a time, starting with Indian Point, and moving on to the way that we're doing it right up there. I'm not getting bogged down in what's going to happen across the country, because people there need to, people in other states, people in other grids need to handle that. And I can talk with them and I can work with them, but right here, right now, what we can do with Indian Point is close it down, use the electricity we have, and work very hard to make that grid as clean and green as it can be. It doesn't stop with just closing Indian Point. I'm not saying it does. Another question?
Yeah, and this is probably going to be the last or the second to last. The students are beyond their expiration date. Question we just got for you. Now, do you think the mining of the heavy elements used in solar panels is immoral as well?
We have to look at that very carefully. I don't know. I have to look at that question more carefully.
Okay.
It depends on how it's done.
We're changing what they're using.
I'm sorry?
We're changing what they're using.
And that is also true. You're right.
They're putting an embargo on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're finding other ways to do it. They're not
Right,
using it.
right. So that's a changing thing, and it's also much smaller amounts, and it has to be looked at.
Okay, I think we are at the hour. I really appreciate these panelists or these debaters for being firm in their arguments and their beliefs, but respectful, which is not always, if you've ever watched a Republican debate, you know this is not guaranteed. I really appreciate it. I want you to give them a really, really big hand.